Firstly, I want to thank the instructors who have already sent me an email. I was a little busy over the last week, so I haven't been able to reply, but I'll reply soon. But just in case you haven't sent me an email yet, here's my email ID, sbansal@csc.iitd.net. So request all course instructors to send an email to this address. Right. Thanks for sending me emails, and also thanks for your questions. I'll not be answering your questions today, but I'll answer them in the future lectures. Today I'm going to continue my discussion on continue my discussion on locking. Right. So last time we were looking at scenarios where we needed where we had concurrency. Right. And when there was concurrency, there were problems, right? So the problem was that, let's say there was global shared variable and multiple threads are accessing this variable. Then if these accesses can get interleaved, right? So let's say this was access A1 and this was access B1. This is thread 1 and this is thread 2. And let's say this was access A2 and this is access B2. Then if my accesses to this shared variable are interleaved, which means, for example, I have A1, A2, B1, B2, then I have a problem, right? On the other hand, if they were not interleaved, for example, it was A1, B1, A2, B2, then this is okay, right? Also, if I had A1, A2, B2, A1, B1, even this is okay, right? So basically, both accesses of a thread should execute uninterrupted, and both accesses of the other thread should execute uninterrupted. And so these are okay, and this is not okay, right? So one of them has a problem, the other two is okay. And last time we said, okay, so we need to do this, and how does one do this? And we said there is an abstraction called a lock. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let me draw a lock. So let's say this is my lock. So I'm going to take a lock, and then I'm going to access A1. Okay. So access A1 and then access B1, and then I will say unlock. Right? Let's say this is unlock. So the idea is that, and similarly when this thread accesses it, so it will lock and then it will unlock. Right? And the idea is that while this lock is taken, while this lock has been locked, the other person cannot also lock the lock. So only one person, one thread can lock at any time. So while I am executing A1 and B1, the other thread will not be able to take the lock, and so it will not be able to interleave. Right? Only after the first thread has unlocked does the second thread get to run. And so A2, B2, A1, B1 is a valid schedule. A1, B1, A2, B2 is a valid schedule. A1, A2, B1, B2 is an invalid schedule. And locking ensures this, right? So locking prevents this schedule, right? Okay. Right. So once again, just review what is a lock. A lock is a, let's say, is an abstraction. I can define a lock as a struct lock, let's say, and two functions acquire, struct lock star L returns void and release. Okay, so what does the acquire function do? It acquires the lock, which means it locks it, and it acquires it, so nobody else can acquire it while I'm holding it, and release just releases it so that somebody else can get to run it, get to acquire it, right? So we understand lock, we understand acquire, we understand release, and last time we were discussing how acquire and release can be implemented, right? So let's say how we said, okay, let's look at an implementation of acquire. And let's say, so the question is, this is my API. So in other words, this is my lock API, right? So this is my API, application programmer interface, right? But how do I implement this API? Let's discuss that. And so one way, so one implementation is the following. I say struct lock has one element called whether I am logged or not. Just says whether this lock has been acquired or not, right? And then I say acquire struct lock star L returns void, and I say okay, say while L dot locked is equal to 1, keep spinning, right? And then you make L dot locked is equal to 0, right? That's a no that that was lock star L, say L dot logged, sorry, I'm put it to 1 here, and here I'm going to put it to 0. Okay, so that's one way to implement acquire and release, but there's a problem here, right? And we discussed the problem last time. The problem is if two threads try to call acquire at the same time, right, then both of them will be able to take the lock, because let's say initially, so let's say initially it is 0, right? So now one thread comes, it checks whether L dot locked is equal to 1. It says no, it's 0. It comes here, but before it is able to set it to 1, another thread comes and it checks whether L dot locked is equal to 0. It says no. It says whether it's equal to 1 or not. It says no, it's not equal to 1. It's equal to 0. So both of them come here. Both of them set it to 1, and both of them start executing the shared code, or start executing the shared access to shared variable. So if this can happen, then even this can happen, right? So what will happen is one thread tries to take the lock, another thread tries to take the lock. Both threads get the lock, and now this schedule becomes possible. A1, A2, B1, B2 becomes possible because thread 1 and thread 2 both are executing in this area, and so it's possible that A1 executes first, then A2 executes, then B1 executes, and then B2 executes. Right? So it's possible, and so this is wrong. This implementation of a lock is wrong. Right? So how do we fix this implementation? Okay. So let's look at this again. How do we fix this implementation? Well, you may say, oh, let's put a lock around this entire region. Okay, but I cannot put a lock around this. After all, this I am implementing a lock. So what do you mean by putting a lock around this entire region? So that's not possible. So we said, okay, we need some special support because I mean, after all, I cannot. I mean, there's no way I can write this. So what I need is I need to be able to check the value of locked, and I want to be able to set the value of locked, and I need to do these both in an uninterruptible fashion or atomic fashion, right? So the execution of this entire code should happen in some atomic fashion. By atomic, it means uninterrupted. It should not be possible for another thread to be able to look at the state of this variable that I'm touching in the middle of my touching, right? Somebody can look at it before this code, somebody can look at it after this code, but not in the middle of this code, right? So that's why it's called atomic. It's an atomic section or atomic unit, right? All right. So we said, okay, this is how we're going to do it. So we need some other way to do it because this is not atomic by default because this is going to get compiled into multiple instructions, and those instructions can get uninterrupted and they are not atomic. So we said, okay, let's look at what's available. Well, on the x80 on one of the architectures, there's this instruction called exchange, right? On the Intel platform, Intel x86 platform, it's called. So this depends on the architecture or the hardware you're running on. The Intel hardware provides this instruction called exchange, which I talked about last time, and I'm going to talk about it again. And let's see if I was to use this exchange instruction, then and I can use there's an instruction, there's a prefix called lock before it, so I can use lock exchange to basically exchange the contents of a register and a memory location. Right? So if I say exchange R comma M, then the contents of R and M get exchanged. Right? So in my previous case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say acquire struct lock star L, and instead of doing only read, so in the previous code I was checking while L dot log is equal to 1. I'm going to instead try to set and read at the same time. So I'm going to say while let's say I just say while 1 exchange some register R with L dot logged, right? And then say if R is equal to 0, then if R is equal to 0, then return. Right? Before that, I just say let's say R is equal to 0. Oh, sorry, R is equal to 1. So I set up my register to have a value 1. Then I call exchange R L dot logged. So it's going to put the value 1 into logged and read the value of existing log into R. So it's going to exchange this, right? It's going to happen in a logged fashion. So this value comes here and this value goes there. Right? Now if it was already logged, then R would be 1. In which case, what should I do? I should keep retrying. On the other hand, if it was not already logged, then L dot logged would have been 0 and exchange would have caused R to be equal to 0. In which case I can say that I have acquired the lock. Right? And because I did an exchange, the logged variable also got set to 1. Okay. Let's review this again. So here is a register R. This is private to my thread. I set it to 1. Then I called exchange R L dot locked. So this is going to put 1 here right? And the value of L dot logged here. But it's going to do it in an atomic fashion, right? So this is atomic. This is an atomic instruction, right? And then it's going to check if R is equal to 0, then no problem. And otherwise, you know, it's a loop back. Okay, let's understand how it's going to happen in practice. So let's look at this code. Okay, and let's say there are two threads trying to call acquire. Give me a minute. Actually, there is some emergency in the IIT campus, so I'll just need to take this call. Hello. हाँ हाँ. All right, sorry for the interruption. Actually, there is some fire in IIT Delhi campus, so the people who are getting worried. Anyways, all right. So let's look at this code again. So there is let's say there are two threads that try to call acquire. Right. So what will happen is the first thread is going to say exchange. So each of these threads has private register. Right. Let's say this is R1 and this is R2. And so it's going to say R1 gets 1 and so say exchange R1 with L dot logged, right? And then it's going to check if R1 is equal to 0, then return. Similarly, let's say this is another thread R and has a register R2. Let's say R2 gets 1. I say exchange R2 L dot logged. All right, and then I say if R2 is equal to 0, then return. So if you look at this code, only one of them is going to return, right? Just, yeah, please focus here. Yeah, so only one of them is going to return, right? Because let's say R1 executed first. Let's say R1 executed first, and so R1 executed first, and it basically acquired the lock. Basically, it found the lock variable was 0, so R1 became 0, and it returned, right? So let's say at this point, thread 2 gets to run. What will happen? Thread 2 gets to run, but at this point already L dot logged has been changed to 1. So at this point, if thread 2 gets to run, it will see the value 1 in R2. Only one of them is going to be able to return from acquire. The other one will keep spinning inside acquire. Okay. So depending on who reaches first, he's going to get the lock, and who reaches second, he's going to keep spinning. Right. So if I were to draw a diagram, let's say this is the computer diagram, CPU diagram. So let's say this is a bus, right? And this is CPU 1, and this is CPU 2, and let's say this is memory. Okay. Let's say one thread is executing on CPU 1 and another thread is executing on CPU 2. Right. So this is T1 and T2. Okay. And inside memory, there is a variable called L.locked. Right. Each CPU has private registers. So register R, and this one also has its own register R. It's just, the name of the register is same, so we can call it, R and R in both sides, but it's actually different copies of R. One is CPU 1's R and the other is CPU 2's R, right? Now this CPU is going to say acquire, and this CPU is going to say acquire. So what happens? One of them will execute the exchange instruction first. Whoever executes the exchange instruction first is going to get the lock, right? The second one is going to execute the exchange instruction second, and it will not be able to get the lock, right? So let's say CPU 1 executed first. So now it got the lock and it returned from acquire, right? And CPU 2 acquire does not return, so spins. All right. So one of the CPUs will return, the other will spin. What is the other CPU doing while spinning? It is just executing the exchange instruction again and again, right? So it's just reading the memory again and again. So it will keep executing the exchange instruction till it becomes false, right? So it's going to keep executing this. Well, the first one can go forward, right? Once again, what's happening is one CPU got the lock, it went forward. The second one did not get the lock, so it kept trying to get the lock, right? And as soon as the first CPU releases the lock, so let's say it releases the lock, after release, this will acquire will stop spinning and the acquire will return, right, after it has released. Okay, so this type of a lock is called a spin lock. Why is it called a spin lock? Because while that CPU is waiting, the CPU just spins, right? Spins means it waits, it keeps reading the value of the lock variable till it becomes true or false, right? Till it becomes false, till it becomes 0, you keep checking. You keep checking whether it's, you keep waiting for it to become 0. If it never becomes 0, you will keep spinning all the time. As soon as it becomes 0, you will get it and you will move forward. Okay. Now, the question that may come to your mind is, isn't this wasteful? One CPU is just spinning, checking for the lock, right? The other CPU is continuing on its work, but one CPU is just spinning, wasting all these CPU cycles. It is also wasting power, because after all it takes energy to execute an instruction. It's also dissipating heat, because each time it executes an instruction, there's some heat that gets generated, because there are some transistors that need to be switched on and off, and so there is some energy that gets consumed in doing this, right? So these are both problems, and the question is, how does one solve these problems? Right. So this is one way of implementing a lock, right? This is called a spin lock. Another way of implementing a lock is that when, let's say one of the acquire returns and the second acquire is not able to get the lock, it knows that it has not been able to get the lock, so it just puts itself in suspend mode, right? So instead of spin, let's say it suspends itself. right? So let's say two threads called acquire. One of them returns from acquire, and the other one, the thread suspends itself. Right? Then when this one, the first thread called release, when the first one thread called release, then the release will check all the suspended threads and it will say wake up suspended threads. Right? And so the suspended thread will wake up and it will again try to acquire, and this time it may return. Alright. So the acquire may return. It's possible that the acquire does not return even now, right? So let's say there were 3 threads and all of them called acquire. First one returns, second one suspends, and third one also suspends. Right? Then the first one releases, right? Which means release is going to wake up both these threads. One way is to wake up both the threads, and so let's say it wakes up both the threads. So acquire gets to run again. Alright, and then this time it again going to check, only one of them is going to return. So let's say the second one returns this time, and this one again suspends. Right, and so on. So this is going to release, and so on. Right, so that's what's going to happen. Okay, so this suspend is also called block. Right, so the two ways to implement block. One is spin locks, okay, which just keeps checking, and second is blocking locks, or suspend. So the other word to you that is used is the thread has blocked itself, so it's called a blocking lock. Right? So the question is that I have for you is a blocking lock always better than a spin lock, or is a spin lock always better than a blocking lock? How do you decide? Right? Which one should you use? Should you use a spin lock implementation, or should you use a blocking lock implementation? Okay, so please answer the question. Raise your hand on the software and tell me if spin is better or blocking is better. I need focus here. Spin or blocking, which is better? Okay, somebody wants to answer this question? Okay, VCE.
Hello?
Yes, VCE, please say.
Suspend locks are better than compared to spin locks.
Your voice is not clear. Could you repeat, please?
Blocking locks are better than compared to spin locks.
Okay. So the answer from VCE is blocking lock is better than spin lock. Sure?
Yeah, because speeds will be raising the CPU, will be waiting this for the until it gets locked, but in
Okay.
sustain lock, meanwhile other process can other thread can take the CPU.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for your answer. So the answer from VCE is that blocking lock is better than spin lock because when you are spinning, you are wasting the CPU. But when you block, then you have just blocked yourself and no problem. Well, actually, it's not completely true. Okay. So in some situations, by blocking lock is better, and in other situations, spin lock is better. And let's look at in which situations which is better, right? So the answer to this is depends, right? Not one is not necessarily better than the other, and let's see why it depends. All right. So blocking in itself requires some amount of computation, right? So for example, if I have a code which says lock L hits plus plus and then unlock L, right? Oh, sorry. Let me rewrite it. Instead of saying acquire lock and unlock, let's say acquire L hits is equal to hits plus 1. Recall this example that we had done last time, and then say release L. Right? Recall that last time I had discussed that this statement cannot be executed without a lock because it has a race condition. Right? So multiple threads are going to come here, and what's going to happen is only one of them is going to be able to execute. So let's say one of them, multiple threads come here, only one of them gets to run, so he gets to run, then he releases, then the other get to run, and so on. Right? Now question is, should I have used a blocking lock here or should I have used a spin lock here? Well, the answer is, if you look at, so this area which is within the lock is also called a critical section. Okay. The question is, how big is the critical section? In this case, the critical section is only one statement which is around 3 to 4 instructions. If I'm going to if one of the threads has acquired the lock, it will very soon release the lock. After 3-4 instructions, it's going to release the lock. You know it already, right? So in this case, he's going to release the lock very soon. So the second thread, if it is waiting for the lock, it will not have to spin for too long. It will probably spin for 4 or 5 cycles before it gets the lock. Right? Okay, once again, let's focus on, please focus on this, not me. Right? So there is acquire and release, and then there is this code in the middle. Question is, and this code in the middle is called a critical section. This is just definition. By definition, this code is called a critical section. A critical section is nothing but code that needs to be protected by locks. Right? So in this case, this is a critical section. Now question is, let's say multiple threads are trying to execute hits is equal to hits plus 1. One of them gets the lock, it executes hits plus 1 in 4 or 5 instructions, and then it says release. The second instruction, the second thread is going to execute the exchange instruction how many times in this time? Maybe 3 or 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, doesn't matter, right? So this time when this thread holds the lock is short, right? So spinning is cheap, right? On the other hand, if I had executed blocking, then blocking would have required me to execute many instructions to basically say that I have blocked, right? I would have had to make a system call, for example, and tell the operating system that please I want to block, right? So that system call would have taken, let's say, thousands of instructions, right? So in this case, when the critical section is small, it is better to spin, right? Because the critical section is small, if you instead blocked yourself, you would have used a system call to block yourself, and that blocking would have cost you a lot of instructions, because the operating system would have taken you, done something about, put you in the suspended list, done some list manipulations and all that. So that itself is going to take many instructions, many cycles, roughly 100 to 1000 cycles, right? So if you're, so instead of spending 100 or 1000 cycles in blocking, it is better in this case to just spin for 3 or 4, 5 cycles, because the critical section is short, right? Okay, so let's go back here again. So it's acquire, H is equal to H plus 1, release. In this case, spin is better. Block is costly. Right. So in other words, what I'm saying is that spinning versus blocking is basically depends on critical section size. All right. If your critical section is small, use spin. If your critical section is large, use block. Right. So let me take an example where blocking is better. So let's say I say acquire L, and then I execute, let's say, function f foo, which is going to take, let's say, 1 millisecond to compute, and then I say release L. Okay. So foo is going to execute lots of instructions, and then I'm going to execute release and L, right? So let's say if I do spin here, then the other CPU is going to keep spinning for 1 millisecond, wasting cycles, right? How many times will it execute the exchange instruction? Spinning for 1 millisecond. So let's say it's a 2 gigahertz processor, right? Which means one instruction, one cycle is approximately 0.5 nanosecond, right? That's nanosecond, and one instruction is roughly, let's say, 1 to 2 nanosecond, right? So how many times will I spin? 1 millisecond divided by, let's say, 1 to 10 nanosecond, depending on whether it's a memory access or not. It can actually be even 100 nanosecond, but let's say 10 nanosecond on average. So let's say 10 nanosecond. That's roughly equal to 1 millisecond divided by 10 nanosecond. How much is it? It's actually a pretty large number. It's 100,000, 10 to the power 5. Right? So it will spin for 10 to the power 5 cycles. It will keep executing exchange instruction 10 to the power 5 times. That's very expensive. Right? Instead of executing 100,000 exchange instructions, it would have been better to spend a few 100 to 1000 instructions to block itself, and that would have been more efficient, right? So in this case, it's better to use a blocking lock. In the previous case, it was better to use a spin lock, right? So a programmer needs to be aware, if he wants his program to perform really fast, he needs to be aware about how big is his critical section. Is it very large or is it very small? If it's small, use a spin lock. If it's large, use a blocking lock. Okay. All right. So any questions at this point? I'll open the floor for questions before I move on. Yeah, that's fine. I've answered it. Okay, so good. So we have seen how a lock is implemented in spin way. We have also seen how a lock is implemented in a blocking way by blocking the thread itself. And in both cases, we are able to implement areas of code that cannot be interrupted, right? And these areas of code which cannot be interrupted are called critical sections. So now let's look at how to use locks. So we've seen two types of locks, blocking and spin, and we've seen that spin are sometimes better, blocking is better on other times. The question is how does one use locks, all right? So let's say I am a web server, all right, or and I want to serve these requests, right? So let's say I'm a web server and I have one thread per request. Right? One way to use logs is that as soon as you get a request, so let's say this is my web server, and these are my threads inside the web server, right? And here's, let's say, my network from where requests are coming in. Right? Now each time a request comes, a thread gets spawned. Now question is, I want to now, my state is shared because let's say the hits variable is shared and other things are shared, and file system itself is shared. Now how do I put locks in this code? Now one way is that as soon as I get a request, I take a lock, right? In the beginning, do everything I need to do, and then release the lock. Right? So one way, once again, so one way to do it is take the lock at the beginning. Each thread takes lock in the beginning, and releases lock at the end. In the middle, it does everything, right? For example, fetch, parse the request, parse the request, read the file, right? Send the file, and so on. Okay, so that's one way. Each thread takes the lock in the beginning and releases at the end. What is the lock? Lock is also a shared variable. So let's say there's a global lock, which is of type struct lock. Right, and each thread takes the global lock in the beginning and releases it at the end. So what's going to happen? Well, it's, what's going to happen is, let's say one request takes 1 millisecond to serve. Then let's say this is my web server, and multiple threads are coming in, multiple requests are coming in. So this is request 1, and this is request 2. Then first thread is request is going to start getting served, and while the first request is getting served, request 2 will wait. Okay, and this will get served. The first request will get served, the second request will have to wait because it will start spinning on the acquire of the global lock. Right? So the thread for the second request will call acquire and it will keep spinning or it will block, whatever. In either case, it will not be able to proceed. Well, the first request will be able to proceed and it will go for when it actually is done, then it will finish, send the data, then take the second thread. Right? Similarly, it will acquire the lock, then everybody, all the other requests will keep waiting and so on. Right? So this is correct. It's going to work. Right? But this is not efficient because only one thread can acquire the global lock at any time. So only one thread can be active in this web server. So if one thread was, if there were 10 CPUs on the system, 9 CPUs will get wasted. Right? Only one CPU will be active. All the other 9 CPUs will get wasted. They will either be spinning or they will be blocked. In either case, they're not doing any useful work. Right? So what did you want? You don't like this kind of arrangement where it takes the global lock in the beginning and releases the global lock at the end. Instead, a thread should basically say what are my small critical sections and take locks around the smaller critical sections. So in this case, your critical section is very large and you're taking a global lock to protect that critical section. Right? On the other hand, if I had one lock for this and another lock for this and yet another lock for this, right? So let's say I had lock L1 which protects this, L2 that protects this, L3 that protects this, and so on. Then while one thread is parsing the request, another thread can read the file, yet another thread can send the file, and so on. So multiple threads can execute in parallel. And so multiple CPUs can be executed in parallel. So instead of this organization, it would have probably been better to have separate locks. Per module. Right? In the previous organization, I showed you one lock. Right? This was one global lock, and that was not very efficient. But it will be better if you have separate locks per module. Right? So in which case, let's say there was a lock L1 for parsing input request for input packet, L2 for sending reply, and let's say for file system you had an array of L locks, array of locks, one per file. Right? So what can happen is that one thread could be could have taken L1 and could be parsing the input request, while another thread could have taken L2 and be sending the data back. Yet another thread could be reading file foo and yet another thread could be reading file bar, and so all these threads would have taken different locks and would be doing different things, and the system would be running much more efficiently. Okay, so if you have smaller locks or finer locks, it's better for concurrency. You allow more things to run in parallel. If you have bigger locks or coarser locks, then it's bad for concurrency because only one thread can run in the critical section at any time. Right? So this this kind of organization is called coarse grained locking. Okay, and this is called fine grained locking. Right? In coarse grained locking, you take global lock for large areas. Right? It's likely to be correct, but it's not very efficient. In fine grained locking, you take locks for smaller areas. Right? Once again, you have to carefully choose the locks such that it's correct. But if you can do that, then you have increased the available concurrency in the system. So multiple things, the multiple components in your system can run in parallel. One thread could have taken lock L1, another thread could have taken lock L2, yet another thread could have taken lock L3, and all of them could be executing in parallel. Right? So what I'm discussing with you is the topic of lock granularity. At what level should you use locks, right? Coarse grained versus fine grained. Okay, I'm going to continue this discussion in our next lecture, but before that, let's open the floor for questions. So, if are there any questions at this point? Okay, let me take an example, right? So let's say I have a linked list, or let's say I have an array. Okay, there's a question from LNMIT. It says, are there other applications of lock other than race condition? Well, you know, locks are primarily, by definition, locks are used for mutual exclusion, right? Or by mutual exclusion, I mean to avoid race conditions, right? We are going to look at other synchronization primitives, namely semaphores, condition variables, etc., which will allow you to do other things apart from mutual exclusion. So to answer your question, locks are meant to avoid race conditions. All right. Okay, thank you for the question. All right. So let's say this is an array, right? And it has elements 0, 1, all the way to n-1, right? And there are multiple threads that are doing increment. So let's say one thread is doing AI plus plus, and another thread is doing AJ plus plus. So one of the threads is incrementing the ith element, and another thread is incrementing the jth element of the array. Now the question is, no, because there are multiple threads, should you take locks or not? Right? Well, if I could be equal to j, then yes, you know, you have a race condition, and you need to take a lock, right? So the question is, at what granularity should you take the lock, right? So let me just draw this again. Let's say this is A, is an array, and there's code which says, you know, I is equal to some let's say some function foo. You computed I using some function foo, and then you said AI plus plus. Right? Now this code is incorrect, right? We have seen it before that okay, so we have seen it before that this code is incorrect. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to say no, this is not right. So I'm going to, you know, say this is wrong. Instead say I is equal to foo, then lock. Let's say I have a global lock. Global lock. Say AI plus plus. I should say acquire. Right? I'm also using lock and unlock for acquire and release. But anyways, let's say release global lock. Right? This is coarse grained. Because I have one global lock, and so only one thread can execute in this area at any time. On the other hand, I could have done what? I could have said, okay, let me declare an array of locks. So I say struct lock L n. So it is an array of n locks, and instead of, so in the previous code, instead of that, I say I is equal to foo and say lock li, instead of acquire li, then say ai plus plus, and then say release li. So I have a lock per element of the array. AI is protected by li. In the previous case, AI was protected by global lock. In this case, if one thread is accessing 0th element and the other thread is accessing the 100th element, they can proceed in parallel. Because one of the threads will take the 0th lock, the other thread will take the 100th lock, and both of them will be able to get the locks because they're separate locks. Right? This is fine grained. Right, so there's a question in the exchange in a multiprocessor. So there's a question, very good question. It says if there are two threads and this is CPU 0 and this is CPU 1 and this executes exchange and this executes exchange, if both the exchange are executed at the same time, then what will happen, right? Well, as I said, both of them, if they execute at the same time, the hardware guarantees that exchange happens atomically, right? So either this will happen before this or this will happen after this, right? It's not possible that the two interleave, right? So the hardware will ensure that one of them will execute before the other, and that's non-deterministic. Whoever executes first is going to execute it in an atomic fashion. It's not going to, so that's a hardware guarantee. Atomicity of exchange instruction. All right. Okay, great, thank you. And I'll also reply to the emails that you have sent, and if you haven't sent, please send now. I'm sorry for the delay in replying because I've been a little busy over the last week. Okay, thank you.